Welcome to another Facehammer Worldwide interview, and this time we are joined by Vince, all the way from the US. Thanks very much for joining us.
Yeah, absolutely. Glad to be here, man.
Yeah, thanks for taking time out to join us and come on to talk about, well, anything Age of Sigmar, hobby related, really. We're not that strict on our content. We'll go with the flow and see where the world takes us, and hopefully it's not into a pit of isolation and despair. Oh wait, that's already happened, right? So
that's just the world. We can't dig down any deeper, so it's fine.
No, we're not here to solve the world's problems. So I thought probably good thing to do is start off and normally get my guests to say a little bit about who they are, what they do, what's their sort of hobby background, and we'll take it from there. So if you want to just tell the people a little bit about yourself, I'm sure a lot of people know who you are, but let's just go for it anyway.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Vince Venturella. I am a miniature painter. I've been playing Warhammer been a nerd for most of my life, all my life, whatever you want to say. Started playing D&D in 1989, so I've been playing for more than 30 years. Started playing Warhammer in 1997, so I've got about 23 years in the tank on that. Love painting. Have a YouTube channel where I have a hobby cheating series, as well as lots of other things I do. I run Warhammer Weekly, which is a weekly AOS show. And just love everything about the miniature painting hobby. So there you go. Pretty much me. I teach where I can, go around the world and teach people how to paint and stuff like that. Not this year, but in previous years I did. And hopefully to get back to that soon. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a massive understanding a little bit, but you do an awful lot of different things in the hobby, and obviously in not just from a painting point of view, but also from a gaming as well, because I believe you do a lot of the competitive gaming. I know Warhammer Weekly, you come on with Tom, and I've been fortunate to be a guest on that in the past, and talk all things like meta and Age of Sigmar and that, and it's good for people to check out if they've not seen it. So in terms of for you then, when you got into the hobby and stuff, I know you sort of talked about many years of experience with Age of Sigmar. Were you all in at the beginning, or did you have a break, or if it?
Oh no, I was on board minute one. Yeah, absolutely. I never quit. No. And that reminds me of two things. One, we've got to have you gentlemen in general back on the show again. I've been remiss with the UK guests. It's hard to schedule because I have to move the time, and Tom gets whiny, because he has kids and a wife and a life and stuff. So,
no, what's that?
But I do need to have you guys back on.
No, we'd appreciate that. That'd be awesome.
Yeah, that'd be 100%.
Cool. We're gonna get that done after this. But as to the switch to AOS, we'd been doing the show only for about 6 months when that happened. So we started in January of 2015. Okay.
Yeah.
Doing the weekly show. Now we haven't missed a week since then. I'm proud of that. Every Wednesday, when I say every Wednesday, I mean every Wednesday. We don't miss shows. And so when that all went down, obviously the initial game and launch was, let's call it rough. Okay.
We were there, Mike. We lived it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it was not as good as it could have been. There were opportunities for improvement. That's fine. Whatever. That's the past. But yeah, I loved it. I mean, Tom and I actually immediately set about to writing some Mordheim rules, and we published a Mordheim rule set about a month and a half in that used the AOS rules, but then gave you a structure to play something small, which we thought would be good for getting people in and getting their feet wet, right? Like a small sort of thing. So they didn't have to try to figure out the whole game. They could just figure out a skirmish level entry point, and that would get people interested. And then from there, it would get them comfortable with the idea of community rule sets, because at that time, about the same time we were doing that, we had, the various community comp systems coming around, MoComp and stuff like that. So by that point, it was already off and rolling.
Yeah, and you obviously you play competitively as well as paint competitively, and it's quite interesting to me that you have those two facets to your kind of your hobby. Do you kind of cycle it, you're into the game and you're more into the painting, or is it always been both of them, or how do you kind of manage your sort of time and energy? Do you just sort of?
Yeah, I think it's always both. I'm lucky enough that I have a good club, a good group of people who I play with, so I get a decent amount of games in. I I have Tom to bounce ideas off of, and he's a very analytical person. I mean, I think the way I would put it is I'm more like the Joker. I do Joker stuff. What I mean by that is like I feel like I'm decent enough at the game. Okay, I've won stuff for competitive play, but I'm never like the person that somebody's going to think, oh, that's one of the best players around, and I wouldn't think of myself that way either. Because what I don't put the time into is I try to find a list I like. Maybe I mess with a couple iterations, but then I just play it until I know it. And then I go and I try to do the best I can, right? I'm very reactive. I'm good at like reading people, reading the tabletop. That kind of thing is my skill set. That's where like the competitive nature is. I can generally look at, I know what most every unit in the game does just off the top of my head. I'm lucky enough to have a good memory for detailed rules stuff. So nothing ever really catches me out or surprises me. I remember most people's stuff. So it's little things like that. But like in the end, Tom is a better player than me, and there's many people who are. So, but yeah, I like competitive play. It's a lot of fun. Like it's good to play at a high level. I love a game where you're truly tested. I just think that that's fun for the same reason I like competitive painting. It's fun to see anything being done at that high of a level, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think I agree with that. And one of the things that we've spoke to a couple of our guests over the weekend about, and something that's been on my mind recently, is back in the old edition of Warhammer, the game is a very slow-moving beast, if to put it that way. And if you're into your competitive gaming and your hobby, you could have your cake and eat it in a way that you could paint something to a high standard and game with it, knowing it's going to be good for a period of time. Like maybe it's like 4 or 5 years, and you could play that and really scratch both itches. Now, one of the things that I struggle with Age of Sigmar is that to be competitive, you almost need to be cycling your army a lot to sort of if you're really in that top of the meta curve. It's very difficult to stick in with one faction. There are some exceptions, like Daughters of Cain, Idoneth Deacon. They've managed to wiggle their way through by happenstance to still stay relevant throughout the meta shifts. But I think as someone who in the past likes to paint to a high level for armies, but also play competitively, I find it quite difficult when I'm like, I really like this faction, but because I really enjoy that competitive experience on the table, sometimes I'm reluctant to invest the time and energy painting to a high level across an army, because I know that it's not really going to scratch the other itch, or if it is, by the time it's ready it won't anymore. And I don't know how you feel about Age of Sigmar and how that's affected your approach to armies you take to events, or if it has indeed. I don't know, but I just thought I'd ask the question.
Yeah, no, it's a good question, because I don't disagree with your core premise. The game moves so much faster now, right? When in previous editions of Warhammer Fantasy, you'd get your book during the edition, maybe, right? And that book could last for 4 years, 5 years, 7 years, 8 years, and yeah, I suppose maybe you'd have a durability, but at the same time, you could be demons and be the king and then get blown up by some changes and then have like 8th edition elves come out and just kill everything about you. So, there could still be other shifts besides just the printing of your book. But you're right, it was longer. I think this game does move a lot faster, and I think that's actually a good thing. If the world is going correctly, then we should only be moving more toward balance. And so things should actually be better longer. I think one of the challenges we've had has been that oftentimes we get these weird spikes over the past couple years where an army just seems to have some capabilities that are kind of out of bound, right? Yeah. And those are often hard to clamp back down. And so they kind of cast this oversized shadow on the meta. But at the same time, I don't think that you necessarily have to meta chase like that to do well. No. I think you can go the opposite direction. So I think of like Bill Sousa, who I think is one of the best players in the US. Yeah. He was playing FEC for years. Like like since that original book got published. And this is long before, and that was obviously a fake book, right? That didn't have the real rules in it. And
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and yet he was still, top 10ing tournament after tournament with that army during the dark times of FEC. Now, certainly he had a great day when they published that new book. Like, what a windfall for him, right? Because he showed up to it just, one of the best FEC players in the world, suddenly being handed talk about unwrapping a gift on Christmas morning. Or I think of like Joel McGrath in Australia, who, still plays Beast of Chaos and will frequently do well in tournaments. He'll top 10 or threaten, going all the way. But he frequently 4-1s at minimum. And, that's Beast of Chaos. And they have to be one of the weakest things in the meta right now. I mean, straight up have to be one of the worst armies, right? And yet, because he knows them so well and he's so good at like understanding exactly what his units can do and how deep they can go. Now, at the same time, I think there's also armies that you can invest in and you can invest that time in a more bulletproof way because of their generic capabilities. Yeah. They'll always be competitive. So my three examples would be, the three easy examples of this are Cities, Skaven, Seraphon, the sort of holy trinity of we have too many legacy war scrolls, right?
Yeah.
These are all books with like 50 war scrolls in them, and they play in every phase of the game, right?
Yeah.
In a myriad number of ways. They're never going to be bad. Will they ever be the best? Man, I don't know. That's hard to say, right? Anything's possible, I suppose. But I think they'll always be competitive because it's like, what's good right now? What's hot? What do we need? Shooting? We need some shooting? Okay, I got that. We got that shooting. What do we need right now? Magic? I got magic. You need combat? We got combat. We got it all, baby. You got to ambush. You got to get up there. You got hammers. We got anvils. We got it all. And it's all at bargain basement prices. We have got these models and they are priced to move. So,
because they want to get rid of them, right? Because they need to sell that old stock. No.
Yeah, exactly.
No.
So, no, I mean, I think that when you look at an army like that, it's different than if you're talking about something like Idneth. Idneth is actually an army that I would be highly suspect of, right? Yeah. Because that's a 9-10 war scroll army, something like that, right?
In one basket, right? It's all in that eel
one
war scroll. Right?
Yeah. Yes, realistically there are two war scrolls, Volturnus and eels, but I'm saying there are these other scrolls most people don't see. You never see them in games, but they exist. But like that's an army I would be afraid taking to a high level, right? Unless you really, really love the concept and just said, you know what, if it ends up being crap, I don't care. I love this too much to care. So I think it has give and take amongst the armies. When you're Ironjaws or Idneth or one of these armies that's like a 7 war scroll army, a 10 war scroll army, an 11 war scroll army, it's really easy for you to just ping pong around, right, into how good you are. So versatility matters, I think.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying there, and I think one of the things that's interested to me is the relevance of having an army that has depth in and width in terms of you have shooting, you have magic, you have combat, and also that you've got multiple options within those pockets of abilities you need to be adaptable to the meta. Is really important. I mean, for me, I really like a lot of the armies I like just do not play in the shooting phase. They don't touch it. Like, I like chaos. I like my chaos warriors. I like my death. I like forget.
Not a great day if you love chaos warriors, but sure, I love them too.
Yeah. So I've having this at the moment. It's very personal to me, and I'm trying to get motivated to doing a Slaves to Darkness high-end army, and then I keep worrying and going, am I wasting my time? Am I wasting my energy? Am I going to? And I'm kind of thinking that because when I see a lot of the stuff out there, like some of the Zinch lists, the Seraphon lists,
sure.
You look at it and go, man, that's a lot of good stuff that's going to be really hard to break down because I don't have that reach out and touch. I mean, Slaves is a little bit different now. You got the teleport, you got Be'lakor and things like that, but I think it's a massive thing, right?
Yeah, I mean, here's what I'll say with Slaves. We can all lament the current state of Chaos Warriors, okay? Oh, how the previous poster child has fallen, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, so I have a deep, deep love of Chaos Warriors. I think those new Chaos Warrior sculpts and Chaos Knight sculpts that they did are just some of the legit best work they've done in years, because it was like this perfect homage to the original sculpts, but introduced this dynamism. I'm not sure if Seb sculpted those or who did. I don't know, but whoever did it, A+ work. He did a great job. Now, that being said, in my estimation, you can never go wrong painting slave stuff, ever.
Yeah.
Okay? Because because of this weird thing that Chaos Warriors and Marauders and Knights and all these things can do, where when you paint that one model, you just painted 5.
Yeah.
Right? Like, every Chaos Warrior is secretly a pink horror because they all explode into 5 wounds worth of model. Because they're, at the same time, they're a warrior for Slaves to Darkness, they're also for Khorne, they're also for Tzeentch, they're also for Nurgle, they're also for, whatever. And in the rotation, something in there's got to be good almost at any given point in time, right?
Yeah.
Like, something in there's got to work. So if you just go for, like, the generic Chaos scheme, you can find an army. But, like, what I think, I get it with the Chaos Warriors specifically, but I mean, if you look at Knights are great right now in multiples of those builds. Marauders are way too good in multiples of those builds.
Yeah.
Warriors themselves, my issue there is you put your finger on a problem the game has right now, which is the game isn't very good at compensating for bigger size base semi-elite infantry. So the game undervalues what being on a 25 mil base means and what being in a unit of 40 means, right? And the game overvalues things like having a relatively decent save or mortal wound protection on what is a fairly elite model. So when you look at what you get for 160 points of Marauders versus 180 points of Chaos Warriors, right? That's just not even close. Like, there's no universe where I'm taking that 180 points of Chaos Warriors. It's just, you just take the Marauders every time. And by the way, this is the same challenge with Liberators. This is the same challenge with like, this isn't just them. And the game needs to it needs to come to a reckoning of how valuable a 25 mil base is.
And it doesn't hurt that the majority of them also move like 2 inches faster than their larger base equivalents, right?
They've got just as good an armor save.
Yeah, having all like as good or almost as good at the same armor save, or buffable to the same armor save for all intents and purposes. Faster movement, and you're almost always easily fighting in multiple ranks, right? And just the raw mobility of being able to get more models in, touch more things, spread out more, express more board control, push on more attacks. Like, the list of benefits of being of being 40 dudes on 25 mils is huge, right? And it's a lot different than 20 guys on 32s. Even if that were the same number of wounds, that is knowing nothing else about those units, the 40 guys on 25s are better hands down, flat in every way, right? And that's a challenge in the game right now. The points don't account for that. There's a fundamental architectural issue that the points aren't accounting for.
I find it's also quite hard when you're doing point scaling and things like that, that when you're talking about stuff as you're looking at the raw numbers, so many people, they kind of gloss over stuff like the movement value or let's say the base size, because it's not on the war scroll, right? So when you're looking at it, it's
like a badass musician or something as well.
Yeah, and those things that skew the raw thing, and a lot of people, like you say, focus on damage and save and that kind of thing. But yeah, I think you're right. I think there's definitely an issue there, especially that's why Witch Elves are so good, right? 25 mil bases and like
25 mil bases, run and charge, high base movement value, like now the most resilient models of that type in the game because of rerolls not being stackable. Yeah.
Better armor than anything, wearing armor.
Right, exactly. I mean, here's the simplest example. We mentioned IDK earlier, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Let's imagine the world where Namarti are on 25 mil bases. I changed nothing else about Namarti, except I put them on 25 mil bases. I would argue you'd see Namarti in armies. Just that easy.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Instead of them being on 32s. I'm not saying they would suddenly dominate. I'm not saying you still wouldn't see a bunch of eels. I'm saying they would actually be a present and a force in an army just by a base size switch.
Yep, more close to objectives, like more fighting at the same time, blah, 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 blah.
Yep. Yeah, I always think of it as like the amount of damage you can deliver in a smaller footprint. So
right.
this is why and this is an example. I know that back when the base size were a little bit more ambiguous, you had someone put in a big like monster rather than being on like a big round base, being on like an oval, and an oval gives you a point, right, which allows you to deliver your damage in a small area, whereas on the oval, by nature of being close, you're almost pushing out that space and not allowing anything in to the target that you're attacking. So having and this was always the concept around the Warriors army that I used to run in 8th edition. It's the most damage with the smallest footprint. That's why chariots were so good to tag on corners, and things like that. And I think that's a really important thing to consider when you look at a war score or write an army in terms of how effective it is.
100%. I always think of it as PSI, power per square inch, right? And it's something I think about a lot when you're comparing bases of all kinds. It's one of the reasons I like things like the Mask or Valkia or what's that, Scar, Bloodwrath or whatever. Why I think those characters are actually really good, because they actually have an outsized amount of power on a teeny tiny little base. Like the Mask is is an MVP for the year I was playing Slanesh or whatever, because she would just dance around this tiny little base and she would just dance forward. And she's so fast because she can fly out there and, run and charge and everything. And she's moving around like 16 inches, and she would just tag some big giant unit right on the corner and then just hold them up. And, you can get like no attacks back on her. And she's just sitting there doing her little dance. She's not doing much, but she's just like tying up that unit. It's like, well, you can choose to retreat, or I'm just going to keep fighting you. Then I'll just dance back and I'll heal a little bit every round, right? I mean, there were so many games where she was absolutely Keepers of Secrets are Keepers of Secrets. Let's not kid ourselves. That's a pretty, powerful piece, right?
Yeah.
But they were able to do what they needed to do because the Mask is over there dancing around being a little distraction engine. So, yeah, it's a big deal. It's the reason why, by the way, like to go to the opposite end, when's the last time you saw a Soul Grinder on the table?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. You could up the rules on that Soul Grinder. I love Soul Grinders. I think that's like a super cool concept of some big giant, chaos-infused metallic monster walking on spider legs, spitting phlegm on people. Like, what a cool idea. That's so Warhammer, right? And yet you're never going to see them when they're on that Maw Crusher pie plate. Like, get out of here. That thing not flying on a 160 mil round. I don't care what it does. You know what I mean? Like, that's just, it's there's no universe where that's the right answer.
Unless it's super resilient and you can use it to block off the board.
Yeah, exactly. Unless it was just so unbelievably tough. Like if it had 30 wounds and a 3-up save and a 4-up against mortals or something, I'd be like, okay, great. Then I can just use this as like some ridiculous anvil. Right? But that's what it would have to do. It'd have to have this so outsized role to compensate for that thing. Whereas if the Soul Grinder was some little weedy thing that was on the base it should be on, like maybe a chariot base or something, or 105 mil even, if that's what it was somehow on, yeah, people would run them every so often. They'd show up because they're a neat ranged option in Chaos, right? So,
no, don't even look at them because they remind me of 40k too much.
Well, so, I'm not the guy to talk to if you don't like 40k in your AOS.
Yeah,
I can't stop putting that stuff in. So there you go.
No, I mean, I like, I get it, but I just, for me, back in the old days, it always felt like it was like an afterthought. Like, we can release Warhammer rules for it as well, right? It's fine.
Sure.
Like, I mean, it is clearly a 40k kit, and it was like, I mean, AOS you kind of get away with it a little bit more because of the way the world is, but back in the old edition, it was like, really? Okay.
You had a very pretty conversion there, Russ.
Yeah, I made mine out of an Arachnarok and a Mutilith Vortex Beast, so
nice.
Cool. I wanted it to look like but I only did it because we got some sort of comp benefit of having one. It gave me extra points. So, yeah, it's quite interesting to hear you say that. I mean, I think from the gaming side of things, you tend to just think that when you pick an army and a project, do you want to pick something that's safe in that viability range that you talked about? You're like, oh, okay, well, I know this is going to be good for X because I can see it's got all this suite of tools, or it's got the adaptability of like Slaves to Darkness, for example, where you do have the extra battle tomes. Does that factor in your decision making, or is it just you're kind of like, well, I don't worry too much about that because I can play around it anyway, and I'm not there to It's a win-win-win.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely the latter. I mean, when I pick an army, it's going to be on aesthetics, because if I'm going to sit there and put maximum effort into an army, which, I mean, I have 16 or 17 painted armies at this point. So, like, if I'm going to do another one, it's going to be a maximum effort hobby thing. There's no reason for me to speed paint something at this point, other than for a video, right? Like, if I'm doing a tutorial on speed painting an army, because those tend to be popular, great. If it's a fun little project where I can have it in my club, great. But if it's an army for me, then it's going to be something I go to the nines on, and it's going to be a purely aesthetic. I have to be in love with it, or I have to have a concept that really grabs me, and I'll want to make it the best I can, but I don't really sweat too much because, again, I mean, just the amount of time I've been playing Skaven since, let's say, 1998.
Yeah.
And in that time, I mean, I still have all my Skaven. I just rebased them all last week. And that's, I have 10,000 points of painted Skaven, and that's not an exaggeration. I literally went through and added everything into War Scroll Builder to see exactly what I have, and I have 10,060 points of painted Skaven without battalions.
Well, in fact, you're 10,060. Like,
yeah, it's 10,060. I know the exact number. But that army's been great. It's been terrible. It's been broken. It's been everything in between in the time that I've played it, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm not too worried. Like, the pendulum will swing around, and I'm in for the long haul with a painted army.
Yeah.
With the way I figure it, the more high quality painted armies I have, if I am concerned to take something good to a tournament, the more I open up my options, Yeah. So just over time, if I spend a couple years putting maximum effort into painting some high quality armies, okay, well, one of the 4 or 5 of them has to be good, right? Like, I've got to have something there that works. So you can just kind of flood the board, I guess, is what it is, right? But like when I did the Whirlwind's Edge army recently, speaking of 40k and AOS, that's a Cities of Sigmar army. It's Tempest Eye. I thought it was good. I thought it had competitive legs. I do not think it's it's well outside of the best thing around.
Yeah.
But I thought, it's shooting. It's got good power projection. It has these pieces I want. Like, it has to reach some threshold of viability, right? And then I'll be like, okay, then I'm ready to go. And there are sometimes exceptions. Like, I would have painted if the Slanesh book had come out and had been as bad as it was good. Okay, so imagine the mirror universe where it's it's on the opposite
one of the
end
timelines. It's not as good as it is now,
right?
So
exactly. If that was the spot we were on the timeline, I would have exactly the same amount of painted Slanesh, and I would have played it exactly the same amount as I did there. It wouldn't have influenced at all because that is, like, Skaven and Slanesh are these two yin yangs of my heart. Yeah. Of the things that I truly love. So.
I don't know what that says about you, but that's like, I don't know if I can trust you right now, but I don't know.
It definitely says exactly what you think it does. Yes, that's what's in my heart.
No, that's awesome. I think what's really interesting, you should have seen the version of Celeste that me and Les saw before it got toned down. Not even making that up. That's quite cool. I'd say that so obviously you've said that you're sort of a Skaven and a Slanesh person, and that's your kind of your stick. How invested are you in the background to AOS? Because, like, obviously the old world was this wonderful place. It had a lot of depth and richness to it. There was a lot. I mean, I remember the Skaven book where you've got the story about the townsfolk building the tower. They couldn't complete it. The stranger turns up and he offers to finish it in one night, and it tolls 13 times. And I remember reading that as a kid. It's a absolutely amazing piece of sort of background to the Skaven that just really captured a lot of people, and even people I speak to, that was one that story really grabbed a lot of people into being a Skaven fan. And I'd say that with the change to Age of Sigmar, how much time have you spent kind of investigating the lore and the background, and is it something you read a lot? Do you read a lot of Black Library? I know Tyler's festooned with Black Library books. Is that something you spend your time on, or audiobooks, or are you kind of more like dabble but not really deep dive into the background?
Scale of 1 to 10, 1 being I couldn't care less, and 10 being I'm buying every library book and obsessively making Pepe Silva boards on the wall about my theories of Phil Kelly's future plans. That kind of a scale. I'm a 3.
Yeah.
I like things at a high level. What's the conceptual thematics, right?
Yeah.
And then I make my own story to go on top of that. I love the Skaven. I know exactly the story you're talking about. I did read that. I did love that story. There's another story from the fourth edition, 5th edition Empire book of Karl Franz fighting a big giant orc boss and like nearly getting killed, and then the spirit of Sigmar like infuses him, and he's like 8 feet tall in the orc's eyes, and he's got the power of Sigmar and stuff like that. And I remember that story and thought that was just like one of the coolest things. That's actually, I started and played Empire for a few months before I went to the better Empire, the Under Empire. But there's little stories like that I think are okay. But I mean, I didn't find Not Europe compelling.
Yeah.
Not Europe was fine. I enjoyed Not Germany and their allies, not Brittany or not France, UK, whatever. And the border states of Not Italy and not North Africa. And then those knife ears who live over on Not Atlantis. Got it.
Yeah.
I didn't find it that, like, if I want good fiction, I'll go read good fiction. Like, there's people writing amazing fantasy fiction out there, and that's no offense to Black Library authors. It's just that world is a very constrained world, right? It had to be this particular thing. And, there have been some great books written within there. I think Laughter of the Dark Gods, if you ever read that collection of short stories from back in Warhammer Fantasy, which is kind of all it was a collection of chaos short stories. I think that was a really good one. Like, there is some that will rise up. But for the most part, what I love is just the thematic elements of the army. Like, I think Skaven are cool because I love the nature of their society, how insane it is, the deviousness of it, right? And just the madness of Scryer's inventions and Eshen's assassins, and just it's cool. It's got a cool vibe. I think that's the best way to say it. I go on vibe. What's the vibe of this thing, right? I got into Iron Jaws because I was like, these guys have got a cool vibe. They punch their armor into shape. They bash steel plates onto themselves, hammer them in to each other, put it on, and go, and they hit people harder than anybody can normally hit people. And I was like, that's a cool vibe. I like these dudes. They're the biggest. And so it's stuff like that grabs me more than like, there are Slaanesh stories that I've read that I think are cool.
Yeah.
But in the end, none of it is as good as just what all of it represents.
Yeah. That's what you're saying. Yeah. So you can make your own stories with the concept rather than deep diving into the nuances of Phil Kelly's mind. Yeah,
and that's not in any way to say that. I think the move to AOS is the best thing they ever did for the story because it blew it wide open. You can see all the fun Phil has writing this stuff, and he writes amazing detail into there that's full of super cool lore peccadillos. I play in a semi-regular Soulbound game, and I love messing around in the world. I feel that the Mortal Realms are an incredibly compelling place to occupy, but I'm not that deep into the lore, is what I'll say.
No, so it's not a big part of your inspiration for collecting it. It's kind of in terms of your you don't read a story and go, I want to collect them like Hallowed Knights because I've read this book on. No, I mean, the big project I want to do, like, if you want to talk about lore, the only lore I like is my own fanfic. I like that's what I like. My imagination, like my Tempest Eye army being Whirlwind's Edge, it's all city that I wrote up a story for, and I wrote up everything for and built the whole army to spec off of my story because I liked the idea. If they come out with a new Stormcast book at some point in time and it's good and it grabs me and I like it, that'll be the excuse I need to convert an entire army of Skaven Stormcast. So of my rat cast, because in my Soulbound game I'm playing a Skaven priest of Sigmar, like a redeemed Skaven, and I want to picture the world where he leads a bunch of other Skaven to redemption under Sigmar's holy light, and they're all now like the faithful, and they've come across and turned away from the horned rat, and that's kind of stuff you're never going to see in the actual fiction. That wouldn't happen. It's too.
But in my world. It's too bonkers. But in my world, I'm like, yeah, I like bonkers stuff. Let's do it. Your story can be whatever you want.
Yeah, exactly. And we're talking a little bit then again about painting, because obviously you've got a very good channel, Hobby Cheating. I've stolen, I've gleaned knowledge from that, and
you're welcome to steal. It's just borrowing. It's okay.
Yeah, exactly. Like I followed your Imperial Fist recipe for my Tor Garradon. I hope I got that right, because I don't do 40k really, but
no, you got it. I love me. It's a great model.
Yeah, and so you did the Sergeant in that nice yellow using the Dale Rowney inks and some of those products. So I shamelessly stole that and had a go at it and learned a bit on the way. And yeah, it's a very useful thing you do. But you obviously you kind of caveated the word hobby cheating, and I wanted to kind of understand your approach. I know everyone talks about hacks and shortcuts and cheats to paint models, and we were just talking to James from Siege, and he talks about you got to do the work and you've got to push yourself, and you just got to put there aren't any shortcuts. It's just, you just got to charge it head on and do it. And
sure.
I kind of get the sentiment, but why do you sort of aim at hobby cheating, and what's your kind of intention behind that content, and why do you go for? Because there's a lot of effort to make this content and do it and put it out there. So what's your motivation for doing that?
Yeah, I mean, we're 260 videos in at this point. I actually just the minute before I joined, I had just finished editing and saving the next one I was recording, which will be out next month. And the idea behind cheating was this. I think that in the end, the one thing I'll agree with is there is no substitute for deliberate practice. Not just practice, but deliberate practice. Okay. So there's a social psychologist named Anders Ericsson. If you've ever heard of the 10,000 hours rule, that's where that comes from.
Yep.
Now, he really hated that all of his research, his years of great research, got broken down into just spend 10,000 hours doing something, because that's not what it actually was. His real story was all about deliberate practice. Like when you look at top athletes and top performers in any field, what they do is they don't just go out there and you want to get better at football. You don't just go play football every day, right? You do a day of very focused leg strength training, and you do a day of endurance aerobic training, right? And you do dexterity work, and they're doing very deliberate things to build specific muscle memory and strengths and traits, right?
Yeah.
And to me, there is no shortcut to that, of deliberate practice. Now, that being said, there's a lot of stuff people waste time on they don't need to be doing. Okay?
Yeah, 100% agree, yeah.
And you can absolutely shortcut a lot of things down into being a lot faster, especially depending on what your goals are. Not everybody's goals are to sit there and paint something for Golden Demon every time you paint a miniature. There's nothing wrong with that. The goal of having a painted miniature is having a painted miniature. It can be whatever quality you want to get to. And finding the techniques that are going to get you to that state you want to aim at in the most efficient way possible is ultimately part of what motivated me to do this, right? That there are a lot of cool things you can do that are faster than how we're generally taught. We're taught a very inefficient way to paint.
Yeah.
That is to say, the method of base coat, wash, layer. That's an extremely inefficient method. But it's a very easy to follow method. And that is very advantageous when learning, right? Because when you're learning, you need, when you're first taught division in school or whatever, when I don't think they teach it like this anymore, but when you're first taught division, you learn long division. You go through all the steps. Now, you don't actually have to do that. Then they're going to teach you the shortcuts later on, right? But they want you to understand the math behind it, because there's some value behind that. So if we taught differently, people would have to put themselves out there more. They'd have to be more open to failure. It's very hard to fail in the GW standard method, which means people don't tend to get discouraged and will keep painting, which is good. Thumbs up. The problem is that you're learning about a lot of things that you're later going to have to unlearn. And I think that's part of what I was focusing on with hobby cheating, right? Is this isn't the only way to paint. There's a lot of different ways you can go about these things, and no one of them is right. And by the way, it's not me attacking the base shade layer method. If that's really what you love and what gets you the results you want and you're happy with it, then knock yourself out. Then let's talk about how we can improve that even more, right? Because there are cheats you can even do there. Okay, let's prime in the color that most of your base coats are. Great. Now you didn't need to base coat part of the mini, right? Like even then in that method, there's still things that you can cheat, that you can gain efficiency, because to me, time is the only resource you don't get back. That's it. You'll make more money. You'll get more minis. You'll play more games. Hopefully, we'll see how this year shakes out. Yeah, theoretically, you'll do all those things, but you'll never get more time, right?
Yeah.
So it's about getting the most value out of every second of your life. That's all.
Yeah, and I think that's it's good. And I remember watching one of your videos, and you're saying like you can stop here and it's fine, but if you want to go a bit further, you go here and you go a bit further here. And I think it's that varied degree is quite good. And I appreciate what you're saying about when you're learning and you get taught a structured way of painting. I think the difficulty is. And it's something that we're keen to address with the content we're going to do, is about the barriers that people put up in front of themselves around any aspect of it, whether it's gaming or painting, whatever, where they've almost gone, well, I'm in my comfort zone and I've got my structure and that's what I know, but do I stay in the pocket? Do I stay in my comfort zone? And but actually I'm scared to go outside. And it's overcoming that fear to go, right, actually, let's do the new thing. Let's try something new. Because at the end of the day, it's not life or death here, right? We're talking about experience of a hobby, and you won't find these little shortcuts or gems without experimenting and without changing. So,
yeah.
I totally.
Yeah, I think fear, you're absolutely right. Now, first of all, as we all know, you must not fear, because fear is the mind killer. But
Les is just like Les is going to go into June now. Like, he says like that. Have you seen the
trailer? I've watched the David Lynch version about 50 times. By the way, that's not an exaggeration. Yeah. So there you go. Yes. I mean, it's funny to me that people are afraid when putting paint on a miniature. I get it. I get why they are, because they think they're going to ruin something. But I just mean I don't really understand that. You can't ruin something with paint. That's not how paint works. It's not a permanent thing you're doing. Like if you're going to take an X-Acto knife to something or a Dremel to something, you can ruin a sculpt, right? You can cut away pieces or grind something out or destroy something, and then if you don't know how to resculpt it, well, okay, then that's ruined now, right? But with paint, you can just paint more. Like it's just paint. It'd be like if you paint a wall a color and you don't like that color that the wall ended up, you're just going to repaint the wall. That's what we all do. Like we know this in our normal life. And it's the same thing with a miniature. I mean, worst case with minis, you can even strip them.
Yeah.
Right. So
James just said exactly the same thing before you're on, actually, saying that, biostrip exists. If you didn't like it, then go again. Yeah,
there's zero risk to it. But so
do you think
the number of times I painted something and then painted over it again because I didn't like it? Hundreds. Thousands.
But do you think it's more the fear of failure than the fear of ruining the model? So it's not the fact that the model won't be a usable thing, but you've spent the time and effort to get to that point, and then you're not happy and you go, I wasted that time and now I have to go back in time, and I don't. That's a hard thing, and I'm now. You then put this barrier up and say, I've got to do it all again. I've wasted my time, and now I'm just going to give up. And I think, and it's a little bit. I think is the way you think about that journey.
Yeah.
Getting to that point, because none of that time's been a waste because you've learned something, right? That's
agreed.
Yeah,
100%.
As long as you're thinking about it, you've learned it. If you were just mindlessly doing something and then mindlessly doing it again, then you lost.
Yeah, I mean, Adventure Time, sucking or failing at something or sucking at something is the first step to getting to being pretty okay at something, or whatever, however the quote goes, right? Like, I completely agree with you. I think that people are generally afraid of failure or whatever. I think there might be some perception that people will look at them negatively. I never look at people negatively when they try something and fail. I love that, because I know I've tried and failed so many times, and that tells me you were trying.
Yeah.
Right. And it is like I think people don't respect enough just how much you learn through failure. You know, there's no better teacher than losing, than failing, than missing. You know, whatever you want to say. So it's been very true in my life with painting competitions. I've learned a lot more from losing than I have from winning. That's what I'll say for sure. And I think that's true in the game as well, by the way, in like AOS. When you lose a game, I think it's a good chance to sit down and go, why did I lose? What did I do wrong? Not just to go, well, the dice were cold or this was a bad matchup. Both those things might be true, but I think failure can be a much better teacher, right?
Yeah.
And I just think people need to get more comfortable with being okay with failure, and it's all right. But it is hard. It's hard to take it on the chin. I get it. It's hard to know somebody's about to swing their fist and lean in. Yeah. Right.
And how with the competition painting, obviously, like when we talk about time investment and potentially like failing, if we to use the term, obviously I've never really ventured into the world of competitive painting. I know that Les has, obviously Terry has, and things that in terms of you put all that emotion and time and effort into doing a piece, turn up to a competition, and you know, maybe you don't do as well as you wanted to, or you know, you have that disappointment or that, and let's be honest, like painting is a subjective thing. Is art, right?
Sure.
So there's a level of subjectivity to it, whereas from gaming, it's more objective. You know, it's win, loss, where did the dice go, what happened. Is it psychologically, and obviously I know it's a difficult question to answer, but how do you feel in terms of resilience to keep going and keep trying? It is how much harder it is from a painting point of view when you get a knockback than it is from a gaming point of view. Do you think it's a different mentality, or do you think it's parallel and sort of follows the same things?
I think in my experience at least, it's quite similar, and other people might have different experiences, but for me, I think it always ends up in the same place. You know, because I think in either case, you invested a lot of yourself into whatever that was, right? Whether it was the games, because yes, you're right. Maybe the metric that you're judged by is more visible in the case of the game versus the painting competition. But in the end, I don't think that matters very much. I think what matters is that how much of your own self, your emotion, your time, your blood, your sweat, your tears, did you put into the thing to then lose, right? And I mean, if you've ever if you've ever went to a lot of trouble and baked something really complex, you make a big birthday cake, and then you turn around and accidentally catch your apron on it and it falls on the floor, and you just ruin the whole thing, and nobody's can eat it, and the dog's running over and eating part of it. That's the feeling, right? Of just abject loss.
Yeah.
And you know, the very first painting competition I went to was Crystal Brush, which is that's an insane thing to say in reverse now, but I didn't know any better then.
Yeah.
And I missed by that much of placing in the first one. Okay. So it's a top 3 thing, and I got 4th. I know that I ended up in 4th because I talked to the judges afterward, and they said you were the one you just missed the cut, and they explained why. Cool. Now, on one hand, that was super disappointing, obviously, and I was crushed. I mean, I'm not going to lie. I was broken for about 24 hours because I had put so much time into this, right? I mean, just dozens and dozens and dozens of hours. And I wasn't really experienced with losing at that point in time.
Yeah.
So it really hurt. And, you know, the sting of that never fully goes away, but somehow in me, that sting of loss gets reforged in sort of this crucible over about a 24-hour period into resolve. It just burns away weakness. And I'm like, all right, that's what you think? You think that's what it is? You think I'm good enough for 4th? I'll show you what 4th is. I will show you what 4th is. Okay?
Let's just go next
year. I'm going to do so much better. You're not even going to know. I'm going to start painting as soon as I get home, right? Usually by the time I drive home, I'm on fire by the time I walk in the door. I'm writing down projects. I'm getting stuff out. I'm going through drawers. I'm searching online. I'll show you guys. You don't even know, right? it's just sort of.
I'm laughing. Because it's literally like how I used to be with everything. It's just like, fuck you, I will fucking show you. That's exactly what I'd be like. I used to just literally, so I just rage, like, and let it feed me. Like,
Yeah.
That's how I used to be with everything. I'm like, I'm much calmer now. But like, Russ is laughing because he knows it's me. And I'm just like trying not to go down.
Yeah, you take that sadness. You take that sadness, you wallow in that for maybe a day, maybe a little less, right? You let that really marinate. Yeah. You feel pity for yourself. You let yourself be pitiable. That's okay, right? It's okay to feel bad. But then you've got to burn that away into resolve, right? Like, what has to be left from that period is resolve. And yeah, I mean, that's what ends up happening. And I mean, I lose way more than I win. Yeah. I mean, in any competition I go to, I'm going to lose much more than I win. Is that year where Terry and I both got a golden demon at the same event? I mean, I had 4 entries in that year. I won 1, right? So that means I lost 75%. Now it's great to win 1, but I was a 75% loser that day, right?
You're in danger of giving the guys on the internet a win-loss ratio for your painting at the moment. So you need
it would be a very low score. I would not be making the Hall of Fame for batting averages or anything.
It's like no. You're definitely not S tier, right? That's what we're saying. No, I'm kidding.
Absolutely not. No, like that'd be Angelo DiCello or somebody who has like 65 golden demons or something like that. You know, he's S tier.
Yeah. No, it's cool. I think it's really interesting because I know that you're taking a risk in a way of experiencing that loss when you enter that competition, and it's the same when you go to an event. And I think you hit the nail on the head when you say it's how much of your emotional investment and will you put into that thing, whatever it is in life. I mean, it could be anything, but if it's Warhammer gaming, want to win, it's the Masters or whatever, you want to win, and you really, really apply yourself and try, and you don't get it, I think you're taking a risk. And I think in sort of the way that I'm not going to bang on millennials, or it kind of fit between the border in a way, but you get this culture now of I want instant gratification. It's everyone wants everything easy. They want it at your fingertips. They want to binge the series. There's no, they want everything instantly. I just want to know how to paint. I don't want to have to do it. Surely there's a trick that teaches me how to do it, or I just want to be good at the game and I should just turn up and be able to play and be good, right? And it's not
right.
And it's a bit that Simon Sinek, who I listen to a lot of stuff, he talks about the Everest, and a lot of people do look at the peak and they look at the top and they go, yeah, that's the thing, and then but they don't see the mountain, they don't see the journey to get there. And I think it's really important to try and not be scared of failure, because if you don't take those risks, you're not living, right? That's and I wish I could go back and tell myself this 20 years ago, because I've definitely not been as I've not taken as many risks in my life as I'd like to have done, because I could have been in a different place right now. Not that I'm unhappy or anything, but you think back and go, why didn't I push myself? And I think it's hard to be rejected or feel like a failure, right? I mean, that's not an easy emotional thing to go through, and it is, you do break yourself down to build yourself up in a way. And I think it's important to realise that. I think it's a really tough, particularly even, and I know that people say it's just toy soldiers, but again, you're right when you say it's the emotion that you invest in it. And I think that painting models to a high level is a very emotional thing. I'd say arguably more than practicing for a gaming event, in my opinion. But
yeah, I don't know. Like, I think to me, it can often be the same, especially if you're sort of 4-1 and you lose it in the final. You go 4-1 because you lose it in the final round, right? If you're playing on table 2 in round 5 and you lose that game, whenever you can feel the brass ring with your fingertips and then you fail to grip it,
yeah,
right?
And Gollum just
I think that
into the thing, but yeah.
I think that you always are going to feel that sting, and I don't think there's anything wrong with being afraid of it. Nobody wants to feel like they lost, like they're a failure, like that kind of negative emotion. I get it, but I think at the same time, you can't if you let that sort of fear of not doing this thing, or I'm going to be judged, or people are going to look at me negatively for trying your best, that's just not how the world works, right? Like, are there weird trolls every so often in society or on the internet that act like that? Yeah, of course. But that's not the actual community of Warhammer players or miniature hobbyists that I've ever been a part of or seen, right?
Yeah.
There's that's why I love these communities and the overlap between them, because in these communities, when you try your best, that's what's recognized. That's celebrated, regardless of the outcome, because we've all been there, right? We've all tried our best at something in this game or in painting and failed. So you're not going to be judged negatively or looked down on. What you have to recognize is that, in a way, you're joining the broader community, right? Everybody else wants to welcome you more because they're like, oh, good, you're with us now, right? We've all been in that same place. Join us over here in the pile of people who felt this. Yeah. Right? And so it's not going to be a negative thing from anybody else who's going to look down upon that.
No, I agree, yeah. And I think, talking about content and community, I think, obviously, you do a lot of content, and I'm impressed by your commitment to say that you've not missed one since 2015. Warhammer Weekly, you've committed to a release schedule, and I think that's really that is some real toughness to do that. I think, I mean, life gets in the way, things come up, but I think that's really, really good. I mean, we've been doing Facehammer since 2015 February, I think, but we're off and on. We've never committed to a schedule. We're kind of like as and when. And sometimes we release a lot, sometimes we don't, sometimes we do more, we do less. I think going forward, there's a bit of a change there for us because of our circumstances have changed. But what kind of drove you to start producing content? What was the driving force? You go, I'm going to do Warhammer Weekly, I'm going to do content, I'm going to do hobby videos, I'm going to, do all this stuff that you do that's this great. What made you sort of push your hobby in that direction? Because all the time you're doing that, you're not painting your models or gaming, right, and that kind of stuff, and everyone's got a limited amount of time, as you touched on earlier, where you say you've only got so much time. So what was the driving force behind that? And did you have a change point where you felt like your time is better invested in the community and less in maybe your own skill set and things like that? Or what was it? I'll stop talking now, you can answer.
No, it's fine. These are all good thoughts. I mean, who knows why we do anything in life? It would be my first answer to that question, For any of us who are content creators, right? I mean, and I'm sure each of you could probably answer the same question, right? And you wouldn't really be sure of your answer. Like, you do it because there's some kind of internal voice that says, I need to do this thing, right? And exactly why that voice is talking, I don't know. But I would unpack it like this. Sometime around 2013, when I was getting really back into painting in a big way, and like I had been painting kind of off and on for many years, but it was more of a hate painting relationship. Like, just get these stupid unit painted, play this stupid game. It was that kind of thing. This is my wife.
Hi.
They'll say so. Oh, there they go. So sometime around there, dogs. Yes, I'll take care of. Thank you. So sometime around there, I recognized that like people were talking about Warhammer and miniature painting on YouTube.
Yeah.
Like, I was sitting in my chair and I thought, I wonder if there's like Warhammer stuff on YouTube, and I just never thought to look.
No.
And I looked and I found Reefy Beastman. Reef, if you remember him from back in the day, from 8th edition. He and Martin. He's out in Wales. Nice guy. Obviously loved Beast of Chaos. And I started watching his stuff and talking to him. And he turned me on to other content creators, and I started talking to them. And there's a couple of times where they were like, hey, do you want to come on the show and talk to us? And I was like, yeah, sure, I'd love to. So I came on the show. And just like this thing happened over like, the next year and a half. And then finally I was like, you know what? I think I might want to do this. This seems fun. I feel like I've got things to say. And I like talking to people. I watched Pump Up the Volume when I was a young formative teenager and said, I absolutely need a pirate radio station. and this is a good way to do that. And so, the way the content formed was all completely organically. Like, I didn't sit down and one day sketch out, like, this is the type of content I want to do, or anything like that. It was just like, okay, doing this. There was this guy named Nick out of Long Island, from Long Island Wargaming, who had done a couple episodes of a thing called Warhammer Weekly, but they had been very infrequent. And he wasn't really doing them with any regularity, and he hadn't done one for a couple of months. And so I went to him and said, hey, look, I really like this concept. I'd love to do a true weekly show. Do you mind if I take this over? He said, no, of course not. Go ahead. So I took that, and then that was it. Like, but I went to Tom and said, if we're going to do this, we're going to do this. Once I knew I wanted to do that show, I knew the commitment was going to be, we're going to be here every week. Right. Yeah. And so he was in for that. And when I started doing hobby cheating again, it was because I would watch a lot of tutorials, and I would watch people, and I'd be like, there's an easier way to do that. I don't know why you're teaching somebody to do it that way. And so I think there's some part of like, I want to show you what I know, right? And see how it sparks your thought. And over time, it's grown a lot. And I mean, here's the real truth of it. I've learned just as much from actually doing that and from the feedback of the audience as I have beforehand.
Yeah.
Right. Like, it's an incredible learning experience to share your knowledge because it gets reflected back at you.
Yeah. Yeah, we found the same, and like we have had a bit of a break and stuff, and then we sort of been hitting the content and expanding, doing some YouTube stuff and things like that, and we had this moment where obviously as soon as you're doing shows and talking about things you're not playing at the moment, or there's no gaming, and you're not looking at the army books, and suddenly you're like, oh well, someone wants us to talk about Slaves to Darkness, so I guess I better read the battle tome then that's been sat on my shelf gathering dust, and then you sort of sit down and read through it and start finding all these little nuances. Then you start getting suggested army lists, and then you think about it more, and then for me it's inspired me to do an army. So it's like, it is a very reciprocal relationship when you start engaging with the community, and I think especially during these times, it's been really good for me, sort of since we've got to come out of our shell a little bit and said let's make more of a thing of this, to get that level of enthusiasm and love back in a way, because it's self. Yeah. It motivates you, right? You get excited because you want to produce a piece of content. People engage with you and say that was great, or even if they say actually this wasn't as good, and then you think, well, actually that motivates me to make it better or learn a new skill, and so I think it's really good. And but when we started Facehammer, we literally were just like, we used to listen to all this content. It wasn't really around as much as we wanted it to be. It wasn't really there. We thought we could, like you say, do something that people wanted to listen to. So we did, and it grew from there, really. And it was an organic thing. It wasn't like something we didn't sit down and math out the sort of the business model or anything like that, because it's not a business. But we
just said we should have recorded that Skype chat. And that was it.
Yeah, that was it. Yeah. But I think it's we literally just went, we talk a lot of shit on Skype, we should record it, someone might want to listen to it. where's the turns out some people did, some people didn't, but that's fair enough.
Yeah. No, I mean that's what's awesome about it. There's sort of a very free market thing to content creation, right? People will either listen and like it and talk about it, or they won't. That's kind of the way it goes. And yeah, I mean, it's something where, and it's not just the positive feedback or something. I'm not looking for somebody to tell me I'm awesome. That's not why I want to do anything. No. I like when someone, the best messages I get are, this helped me do a thing. Yeah, that is the thing that makes me more happy than anything else in my day. If I know I helped somebody else do something they wanted with their hobby, like that is rewarding in this way that very few other things in life are, right? And so that continually pushes me and wants me to make more stuff, right? If I'm helping somebody in some way, that's cool.
Yeah, I get that. I think one of the moments for me with Facehammer, and I think Les probably remember this moment, we talk about it quite a bit, is we were at a team event, and we were in the lunch queue. There's some good dudes stood behind us who'd been like hovering around our tables and that, and they sort of said, hey, my name's Dan, I really like what you do, and I wouldn't be at a tournament if it wasn't for you guys. And that turns out to be Dan Mitchell, and obviously he's gone on to do lots of stuff. And then like Joe Purcell, who's there with him, and they're both kind of prolific people now within the scene, and Dan's obviously doing content as well and things like that. And I think that is really rewarding when you think back and go, you know, like I wouldn't be in the tournament scene if it wasn't for Dan Heelan, he wouldn't be doing this podcast, it wasn't for Podhammer, you know, we wouldn't be doing our stuff if it wasn't for, like, you know, Bad Dice, Black Sun, all the Dwellers Below, all these other things, you know. So I think it's it is really rewarding when someone says to you that cheers G, see you later. I think it's really rewarding when you get someone say to you like, oh, you know, you've inspired me, or you've helped me in some way. So I completely agree with what you're saying there. That's a nail on the head, I think.
Yeah.
So in terms of like your channel and your stuff and that, what's your kind of, have you got anything exciting you want to talk about, or plans, or are you just carrying on the grind of the weekly show?
Pretty much just the grind continues. I'm hoping we've got some more AOS content soon to talk about, so I'm excited for that. Want to see them giants. Looking forward to that. I've wanted an army of giants for a long time, and I'm not just a person saying that. I have recorded proof of that when we did an early show in 2016, shortly after the game launched, and there was that original Sons of Behemoth battalion. And I have a 10-minute rant that I should snip and repost now. That's like, okay, here's what we need. We need an army of giants, and I need this kind of bigger giant. So I've been on this road for a while. Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to step up my game in little ways with the way that I do my content. My content will never be as like freshly produced as some people's out there, because it's just not what interests me. Like, I don't have 20 hours or 30 hours in a week to spend on editing videos. Like, I just don't have that amount of time. But I'm going to try to take some steps. Like, I'm trying to create some tools and take some steps to make the content more accessible and, you know, easier to digest for people to watch the tutorials and stuff. So I'm trying to reorient the way I do it. Is kind of what I would say. I'm going to do a couple probably fun collabs and things like that with some other people, just because those are really fun things. But other than that, it's just mostly still going to be me. It's just me doing what I do. Not much is going to change. So
no, exactly.
I like it, and I have the right balance in my life right now, so I'm not too keen to rock the boat.
The scales, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
You're only allowed to play so much, right? You gotta stay within the lines. So
yeah, I have been married for like 17 years, as I meant. So I need to. I'm trying to keep that streak alive too. You know?
Yeah, exactly. No, it's good. I just, I mean, it's interesting you say about AOS like content. What's your? I mean, just I want to TLDR version really. What's your take on the Lumineth? What do you think of the Lumineth?
I think they're a really good. I think they're a really compelling force. I have a lot of mixed thoughts. It's a strange army because it feels like 75% of an army or 60% of an army. Okay, it feels like there's, and I mean that only because the lore and the story and the nature of the army just seems to speak to like so much more that could be there. Does that make sense? What I'm saying there, like. Yeah. These are the nations we've represented, and these are the units, and it seems to be speaking to like so much more. So we feel like we don't have the whole army. Now, that being said, I mean there are little design things I don't particularly love. I don't particularly love like Teclis's spell, but that's more a function of like because spell portal is just probably bad and can just go ahead and be uninvented and life can move on. Like if I don't love that so many lists start with like, okay, I'm gonna add my Balewind Vortex to my portal and then I'll build an army. You know, I hate sort of auto include type of stuff like that. It's like building a blue deck in 1995. Like, yeah, we get it. You've got 4 counter spells. I know.
Yeah.
We all understand. But that gets kind of rote. But that's a little thing. I think Teclis is a neat design. I think he's perfectly well balanced because he's very fragile, but a cool model. I'm not sure about the whole mortal wounding on 6s on things that they can't shoot with a C or C with the Sentinels. that's maybe a little questionable. It's not. There's worse stuff in the game, but on the whole, I think it's an amazing book because it's one of the most internally balanced books I've seen published thus far. I think it represents a new high watermark for that. So if you all had anything to do with that, congratulations, well done. I don't know how much of they gave you to playtest that stuff or to take a hand in it, but I really mean this. Like the 4 main units in there. When I'm saying this, I think internal balance matters so much for the sort of core of your army, right? So your Wardens, your Sentinels, your Stone Guard, and your Dawn Riders. It's fascinating to me that it feels like each of them has a well-defined role and feels well-balanced against each other. And I don't like skews as much as I like having all of them. That's an incredible victory for that army, right? Because that's not eels. That's like anti-eels. That's as far on the other side of the spectrum as you can get. So to me, I think that's actually a great success, right? That all these things have their own value. Little bit of sadness that there's no non-named characters that aren't weedy little casters. Like weedy little wizards. Yeah, exactly. But that's the kind of thing that it can be fixed in time. Like whatever, at some future point, there'll be some more stuff released, and they'll get some kind of neat martial LV hero, and maybe that'll be an expansion of the Techless stuff. Maybe that'll be when Tyrion comes out. I don't know. I just know that whenever Tyrion comes out, I want them Angel Elves. Don't tease me with Angel Elves world and then not give me some Angel Elves, okay? I better see elves, and they better have angel wings, feathered angel wings. I will accept eyeballs in them or not if you want to get super weird and go biblical, but feathered angel wings, and they should be flying, okay? So that's what I want. I'll buy that army.
Just hoping this is the same thing you can play in 3 years' time from the giant rant.
Yeah,
right?
like
I have a rant about it. They'll have to make it, right? Because they listen.
Exactly. That's right. That's my plan. You got to plant these seeds. Like I planted the seed for the giant army in 2016. Somebody watched it then, had an argument took about 6 to 8 months for them to convince everybody else. Then you've got about a 3-year cycle to actually make the army. Boom. My wish came true. So now I'm just planning 2023, 2024. Boom. I get my flying elf. See, you gotta plant the seeds.
Yeah, you got to. That's a key thing. Yeah, plant the seed. But that's interesting. I think you're right, and I do think internal balance, and from from our experience being on the other side of the curtain to a point, I'd say like we've got like 1 foot in. Is that is something that we talk about a lot with more credence than we did in the early days, and that's internal balance of the books. And I think one of the books that I think is a real triumph is the Orc War Clans book. I think is particularly good. I was just going to mention
it. Especially Bone Splitters. I think in there, like anything in there is a viable choice in comparison to anything else. Like really, really good. The lack of points changes after recent times is a testament to just how well that was handled, I think.
And,
completely agree. War Clans was a great victory. I'm more prone to the Ironjaw side because orcs are supposed to be wearing armor. You weird naked weirdos.
it's all about the war paint.
Yeah, indeed. But I absolutely agree with you, right? Like that whole book has really stood the test. Like when you look at the points movements on anything in there, they've been very minimal. And I feel like the last shift where kind of Bard Boys moved a little up, just a teeny bit, and Brutes kind of came a teeny bit down, and I was like, yep, now we're like, it's right on. When I read that book, I'm like, this feels like the scales are just sitting flush. It's great. That book, I agree, is a great triumph in that.
Yeah, and I think I wasn't working on that, but the guys who did, I think they did a great job. So it's I think that, it's interesting. I think what the always intention is that nothing in a book comes out that isn't balanced and isn't internally more than externally, because that's another conversation. But I think it's very difficult when you've got these legacy war scrolls. I think when you've got like this like you've already got a preconceived notion of what those things do, which you kind of got to continue. And
hello,
and maybe they're a little bit like too much, or they're not good enough. But then you're like, well, how much do you invest in fundamentally changing those? And I think those kind of legacy units from the old world, and that's why I think new books like Idenef, Bone Reapers and things like that, they're really hard to get right because you're so limited on the units because it's all new, that to get it like perfectly sort of in line and varied enough. Because one of the things that is really interesting when we're on the other side is that things like you know that if they don't make a model with a gun, right, they can't release a shooting unit, you know. So it's
right.
You know, like if they make a whole range with guns, guess what, they're all going to shoot in some way, right? And that was the issue
Right.
with Caradrons, right? Because you're like, it's like they've all got guns, and you're like, well, how does that from a game design point of view? And I think some of the things where you talked about these spikes, for me, I think that's caused by, just like we talked about, we're pushing ourselves into painting or gaming. It's games designers pushing themselves with new concepts to keep the game exciting. And sometimes you hit, and sometimes you miss, and sometimes, you know. But if you just stay safe, then I think you're gonna be, it's gonna be dull, right? And Warhammer needs to be exciting, and and those things make the game exciting. But also, it's difficult to, you don't want the new thing to be busted, but you don't want it to be dull, right?
Yeah, I mean, so the other part of my background is I've consulted on game design and done game design since 2004.
Oh, right. Okay. So I'm just talking about sucking eggs to you then, basically. But
no, I understand what you're saying. So, like, I mean, I've written 6 different game books. This right here, this book that you can sort of half see in frame, this is the last book I published that I wrote. So, but like, you're absolutely right. So here's the easiest way to think about it, right? This is how I always picture it. Imagine the surface of a balloon, right? And the balloon represents all the game design space that you as a game designer feel confident in working on, okay? Right? And the surface area of the balloon is you continuing to expand, or is your ability to explore new game space, new connections, break new rules, and exception-based gaming. As time goes on, the balloon naturally inflates, right? Because you become more confident in your own rule set better. That sounds weird to say, but it's not. You have more time with it. You spend more years with it. You get more creative with it. You have a deeper understanding of interactions and nuance and everything that's possible. And your previous explorations yield new explorations, right? And as you blow up the balloon, the other thing that happens, in addition to you having more inside of confidence, the surface area outside of what you can now explore and the weird things you can do also gets bigger. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
The sort of image. And what that necessarily means is that as time goes on, you as a designer are going to naturally be able to push the envelope in new and different ways because you've expanded sort of your awareness of how you can even push things. You've gotten, in other words, it's unknown unknowns become known unknowns that you can then make knowns, right? And I think that the great challenge that they have is balancing those legacy armies where you've got, we mentioned the Skaven earlier, where you got 50 war scrolls. And look, I love me some Clan Eshin. Ninja rats are like the coolest thing in the world, right? Like, that's amazing. If you ever talking about stories, like the Eshin rats almost always are like the linchpin to saving the world. They've blown up more black pyramids than anybody else, right? Like, Skaven are responsible for stopping Nagash like 3 out of the 4 times that he's almost conquered the world. So I'm just saying, we get it done over here, okay? But like the Eshin rules in the Skaven book, for as busted as that book was when it came out, like as bent what it was, which is just pricing. There's nothing fundamentally wrong with the War Scrolls. It was just a point issue. When those Eshin scrolls and everything in those are all bad. They're super bad. Yeah. Like, it's just like, I would love to play an Eshin army, but I look at those rolls and I'm like, I can't do it, man. I can't do it. And it's because you've just got so much scrolls. There's 50 scrolls or something in that book.
Yeah.
They can't all be winners. Like, what are you going to do with all that, right? There's just too much stuff. So, one of the things I've said is that in a lot of these books, if balance were to be your absolutely top concern, if that were to be what we were actually on about here, and that was to be your primary concern, if that was what the community actually wanted, then the first thing Games Workshop should do whenever they get a new legacy book that they're doing like that is cut about 20 scrolls.
Yeah.
Just retire all those models, even more than they have.
Yeah.
Okay, and they did some of that with cities, but even then it wasn't a lot. And the problem is we would all hate that. And you saw what happened when they retired scrolls. We don't want that, right?
We're not going to talk about Tomb Kings for the 5th interview in a row now, aren't we? No.
No. That is still my biggest army. I have 13,000 points, 12,990 points of painted Tomb Kings. But that's okay. They've been retired, and I'm all right with it. But the like in general, the community hates it when models go away.
Yeah.
We want this sort of Goldilocks mix of like perfect balance across 50 scrolls and for everybody to do their own thing. But I don't know how you can make the Dwarf Elite Infantry and the Elf Elite Infantry and the two flavors of Elf Elite Infantry, the two flavors of Dwarf Elite Infantry, and the two flavors of Dark Elf Elite Infantry, and the two flavors of Human Elite Infantry all have a completely unique, distinct, and perfect role that balances all 8 of them against one another. Like, there's only so much that guy with sword can do in the game. Okay?
And great sword doing all of it.
Yeah, so like you just hit a wall there with that kind of stuff, and it's tough. I'm very sympathetic on stuff like that. Yeah, I really am.
I think it's one thing that I find quite interesting, and I sort of mentioned it in one of our interviews, where when 8th edition was very stale and we knew something was coming but we weren't quite sure, the end times wasn't really here yet, I dabbled in different games. I sort of was playing things like it might be between 7th and 8th actually, I think it was, but I dabbled in things like War Machine and things like that. And I remember going, I played a little bit of War Machine at the very start, some Crick stuff, and I was like, yeah, cool, some Everblight when Hordes come out, and I didn't touch it for years. So then I was quite friendly with Andrew Galea, and we went to a hardcore 50-point event, which was thrown in the deep end, and I went into that completely overwhelmed by the amount of information. And if you think of it like every unit had its own rules in its pack, it all had a card or 2 cards with all its rules, and every single unit or solo or war beast had its own rules and its own abilities, and actually to understand between the 7 faction, well, I think it's 4 factions in War Machine, went to 5, then there was mercenaries, then there was 5 in. It's so much information, and where you've got a game like Magic the Gathering, they cycle things out. You go right. You cycle things out. We have modern, we have legacy, so we cater to people that still want to play with their dwarfs on square bases from 1980. That's fine. There is a mode for you that other people may not want to go near, but at the same time, like you say, the community gets upset, right? But for me, I remember when AOS come out, and it's like, it's 4 pages, it's simple, get into it, it's super easy, it's super accessible. But if you get into it now, it's complicated, right? I mean, where are the rules? Where is that? What's legal? What's not legal? Why is my book saying this, but this says that? And it's kind of that mix of having the benefit of being flexible and adapting, but actually keeping it accessible. And I think it's an interesting point of view, because there'll come a time where stuff's going to have to drop out, right?
Absolutely. Yes. There's we've invented this Legends thing, and eventually we'll have to use that. Now, where did that go?
Yeah, exactly.
Darlings.
The best article Games Workshop have ever produced was by Jervis, and it was about him writing Blood Bowl and merging his darlings.
Yeah, I've read that. That's good. It's a good one.
Absolutely, like gold. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the things that would be really interesting is if we just kind of, here's a simple thing I think GW should do that would take about maybe realistically 4 to 8 hours of an individual human being's time in the community team. Have the rules team put together a list of the current valid publications for tournament play. Okay. And you just put a spot up on the website under the resources that says, here are the current valid publications for tournament play. And it's like General's Handbook 2020, these issues of White Dwarf, these current battle tomes, right? And they list them, and they can link to them on their store if they're still available, so that people can purchase them. And there you go. And that shows all the. That way, if there's like the question, wait, is this thing still around? Like, because I had a friend come over last week to play a game, and he's we haven't played a game forever, quarantining and all that, and yada yada. And he's not really somebody who's in touch with the scene. And he said, "Hey, are those artifacts still around? Can I take one of those things?" And I was like, "Oh no, those are gone now. There's no more malign sorcery artifacts." I was like, "There's these other ones I can show them to if you want. They're kind of bad and boring." And he's like, "Oh, okay. When did that happen?" And so I had to now explain all of this, right? But he would have never known had I not known that. And if I didn't know that, how do I tell him? Right? How do I even know? I only know because of how close I stay to all of this.
Yeah.
So it feels like the kind of thing that they could just, in the same way that, by the way, if you want to know what sets are legal in Pauper Magic, you can just literally search Pauper Magic sets. You go right to a webpage and it says, here's the legal sets.
Yeah.
If I want to know what's legal in current standard, whatever, right? I mean, it's such a slam dunk. It's a bunch of links. It's a sales tool for them.
Yeah.
At the same time. So there is an upside here. And it just keeps people on the same page. Now, can a TO break that and allow other things?
Oh, of course.
Of course. Because TOs are God. They can do whatever they want. They're the only person you can appeal to over the TO is the Almighty. So unless he's intervening, the TO is the end of the discussion, right? But at least it would get people operating from the same place.
Yeah.
When I think about the complexity, I do wish they had a much more simple on-road product still around, like a permagreen on-road product that kind of got people started. I think that would be a nice thing, right? Like a simple thing that introduced people. That's not just like the big core rule book or stuff like that. A very simple, D&D has this, right? It's like, here's a simple adventure with some starter characters, and here's how you get playing, and here's the basic concepts, and it's a starter product. People use it a lot to introduce their kids and to set up school programs. Yeah. I think about stuff like that because Warhammer has the same potential with sort of after-school programs and clubs and stuff like that. So I do wish we had that kind of thing. But yeah, I think keeping the complexity in check is always going to be a challenge. Bloat will eventually kill the game if you don't stop it.
Yeah, I think
Or do a savage enough halfway house that it gets really graphically reset, and then you're only postponing it because you've just shifted things around enough that people don't now know what is the best thing.
Right.
And I think it goes back to the old days where you go, how much stock can a store hold? How much range can you produce? How much stuff can you keep in stock? How much warehouse space do you need, even from a practical point of view? But I think it's fairly interesting that in my opinion, there is a danger of this bloat, and I think we saw it with X-Wing when you had all these cards and ships, and it kind of got out of hand fairly quickly, and they kind of had to hit the big reset button. But I think they simplified the game systems. They used an app to write lists and adjust points, so they print all the new X-Wing cards don't have points on them.
Gotcha.
They used to print points on the cards, but then they'd have to revise the points, and then the card would say one thing, and there was a document somewhere else, and then what they've done is you had some cards only came with Rebel ships, but you could use them on Imperial ships. So if you played X-Wing, you had to buy everything. And what they did is they basically said, if it's a generic card, it will come in both Imperial, Rebel, Scum, whatever. So they kind of recognised that and addressed it. So I'm quite interested to see if there is a consolidation of AOS in the future, because you'll get to the point where there are just far too many things. And 40k will have the same issue because it's the same model, essentially, right? I mean, they're releasing a new thing every month, every other month, a new book, a new faction. I mean, like... You not only are you recycling the old stuff, but you're also adding, right, every time.
Yep.
There's new stuff
every time,
new. And I know there was a little bit of space where there was a lot of fine cast stuff, and some of the stuff didn't make the cut to from the compendiums back in the day to the actual battle tomes or the compendium, as it's affectionately, or the legends, as has happened once for the Dark Elves and no one else. But I do find it quite interesting. I'm interested to see where they go with it from a design point of view, because I do think it's going to come back to bite them, and it does make me worry.
Yeah, I mean, if history repeats itself, there's a very simple cycle to this. So, you know, did you all read Cain, the third book in the End Times series?
No.
Okay.
I've got it. I read some of it, and I apologise for anyone who likes this stuff, but if it's written by Gav Thorpe, I can't get through it.
Yeah, it's fine. I really liked Cain. I did read all of that lore. I did enjoy all the End Times lore. Cain, I think, is the best one of the whole book, of the whole series, by the by. It focuses on like the Ranadandra or whatever, and the cycle. And what happens is the elven gods show up and talk to Tyrion and Teclis, and they say like, "Oh, well, look, here's what happened. Let me give you the breakdown. So here's the story. We were the heroes in the last world. That world blew up. Now we're your gods. Now we're about to die, and in the next world, you'll be the gods. You're the heroes here, and in the next world, you'll be the gods. And this cycle will continue until your next world dies, and you have to pick and empower new people again." Okay, and so that's kind of what was explained to Tyrion and Teclis or whatever. Great stuff. So all of this has happened before, and all this will happen again. Very Battlestar Galactica kind of way that the elves live, right? And that's very much the story of Warhammer as a meta product as well, because you had the initial launch of Warhammer Fantasy and second and third, and the game got so big and bloated and weird and messy because it had been published in a bunch of different sources and was part of proto game and everything, that they eventually just said, okay, stop, shut it all down, restart it with 4th edition, right? And 4th is a completely different game than 3rd, like totally different.
Yeah.
And then 4th and went to 5th, and then it bloated and bloated, and we did a bunch of magazines and specialist games, and that went on for about 8 years, and they were like, oh, okay, we're too big again, we got too bloated, oops, all berries again, we broke it, shut it down one more time, we're going to print out Ravening Hordes and make 6th edition, right?
Yeah, I remember that, yeah.
And then 6th and 7th and 8th, it had the longest run, but it was also the worst run there for a while at the end of 8th, with just like one of the worst financial periods for fantasy ever. And, you know, because they ran it out way longer than any of the other cycles. The other cycles were both like about 8-9 years. That one was more like 14, way too long. And they ran it way out, and then, oops, break it all, shut it all down, and start over. So like they, you know, it's a very regular cycle of like 2 to 3 editions. You bloat out the game too much, then you've got to stop and go back to formula. And so we can all stop that, right? If we just get on the train now of like keeping the bloat in check, keeping optional things out there, not always something new that has to be competitive that just continues to blow up the game. You know, supplement it with narrative things people like. You can do little things, you can do story things, you can introduce a new unit here, you can expand a new army in some way. And then you can kind of keep the game contained, right? Because it's always trying to break out, right? It's like it's like a cat in a box. It's trying to get out of there. It's shaking that box around, but you gotta keep it tight grip, or it's going to explode.
Yeah, you know, they've kind of done that though with Malign Sorcery, because that's been retired now, because we're no longer using that. So they kind of already have taken that step.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right, Terry. I think that was like, in the end, I hate what they did with Realm Artifacts. I truly hate it. I'm not going to get into it because it would add another 20 minutes to us sitting here talking if I explained why I hate it so much. Okay.
I'm sure you covered it on your channel though, right? So someone.
I have gone on a big rant on my show. Yes. And Rob and I also had it out on his show over it too. So there you go. But the reality of it is, I like the core concept, retiring those artifacts, which, by the way, we still have all the endless spells from that supplement.
Yeah, which I think needs to go as well, right?
Yeah, we haven't gotten rid of all of it. We've gotten rid of part of that supplement.
They've got models, right?
They have models, yes. But, I mean, how do you get those models other than secondhand sources, other than buying Blind Sorcery right now? They don't sell those individually.
No.
Right? Now, if they're going to reprint a pack in a month from now that's just like, oops, all endless spells to continue that joke, right? And it's just those, and then they're like, forget about Malign Sorcery, that's not a thing anymore, we're officially retiring that product. I'd golf clap. I really would, because I agree with you. What has to happen is that kind of stuff has to eventually fall by the wayside, right? And kind of be like, that was its time in the sun as a supplementary product, and now bye-bye. And what should ultimately stay is kind of the core and the battle tomes and, stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. It'd be lovely to get to a point where when someone asks me how to build an army, I can tell them something, then when they ask why, I can tell them why. Because I don't know anymore. I'm building a Vampire Count's army. Can I take this person as my general? If you're doing this, okay, which book's that from? Maybe this?
Right.
Possibly. Yeah.
Well, and that's why I really want, one of the things I've really, really, really asked for and would love to see them do is all of these like White Dwarf supplementary things that come out, like the Jaws of Mork recent thing, which I love, by the way. I think that's great. I love that they do that stuff.
You're going to use the word annual, aren't you? An annual.
No, I'm not going to use the word annual. Like, that's I like, if they want to do something like that, fine. I used to buy the annuals for all the Mordheim annuals and stuff. So it's not something I'm not unfamiliar with. But here's the really simple answer: just put that stuff up in PDFs in, again, the resources on your websites. Like, you already have the InDesign files.
Yeah.
Okay, like. I've published books. I know how this works. You've got an InDesign file on somebody's computer with all the layout done, and you then converted it and sent that InDesign to the printer, who then and that printer then ran off all those books, right? That InDesign file can be exported to a PDF just as directly from your desktop. Click that button, right? And just have a place to host that stuff, which, by the way, that ties back to my this is your current legal listed stuff. Right? Because then in the case of White Dwarfs that are no longer around, you could just link directly to the PDFs. And then we could all go, wait, when somebody wants to play that Night Haunt stuff that came out in January or whatever, which I can't even remember what it's called. Something about Jade or the color green, maybe? I don't know.
Yeah.
Whatever it was.
I don't even know what you're talking about, so there you go.
Yeah, they did some great battalions, but that's just it. If you don't have that January White Dwarf, somebody's gonna show up at a game and be like, "Oh, I'm running this thing and this thing and this thing," and you're gonna be like, "What? I don't know what any of those things are."
Just put it behind a paywall on the app, like paying for it,
Sure. I think in the world of tangential content like that, they should be good guy GW and make it free. I really do. Like, you made your money off the White Dwarf from 6 months ago, right?
And you're going to buy the models, right? So
right, and exactly.
You'll buy a new army because that thing exists, right? Because of that Fangs of Mork or whatever. You're going to go out and buy a Squig army. Tom Worsley did. He did. But, you're going to go out and buy a Squig army. So it's a catalyst for people to spend money and invest it. So, if it was, I'd like to see it for free, really. I mean, like, it was always the weird thing I had with 40k where, we had the AOS, so you had all the war scrolls you could download and have a look at. 40k, you had to buy the codex, and nothing was free. You couldn't see anything. It was all just books. I don't know about the new edition. I'm not really a 40k guy, but it's for me, like, that was a good thing about AOS is you could actually download all the rules. They were there. They're on their website. You could look at a model. You can look at his rules. It's there, and I use it quite a lot when I'm making content. I'll search the store for a model to read the war scroll rather than go to all the books, because it's a lot easier for me when I'm on my PC trying to record. I can pull that information up quickly. So. Yeah,
100%. I don't know the last time I've looked in a book at a war scroll. It's a long time ago. I'm looking on my phone or on the web, right? Like, because why would I scroll through my book? These things are just easily digital. So just publishing that stuff, I agree with you. It sells models. Your main mission, GW, what's the core of their business? It's pushing plastic, right? That's what they're doing. They want to sell as much of that as possible, and making those things that people will glom onto and get them inspired to make an army, making those more easily and freely accessible when you've already gone into the black on the initial run of creating them, it just makes sense. Like, why not make more indirect revenue off of it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Well, I think we can wrap up now, because obviously we could talk for ages about Warhammer and AOS and everything. And I'm conscious we've gone a little bit longer than we said, but I just it's great to have you on. So I just wanted to say thank you very much for taking your time, coming on and being part of our little fledgling event that we're doing instead of running our tournament. So super appreciate it.
Absolute great time. Very, very happy to be here. Sorry that I couldn't see any of you all in person this year. I will ping you. I want to have you guys on the show sometime soon. So we'll figure out a date, whatever makes sense there. And thank you all for staying up till I think almost midnight your time with me. So I appreciate that.
It's getting close. It's getting close to midnight.
Cool.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And it was great to talk to you. So thanks for coming on.
Cheers, dude.
Yeah, cheers. Thanks.